So it finally happened. Pit stopping, pit boosting, recharge, whatever you want to call it. We finally got to see it for the first time in a race. And, well, was it what we was expecting? So there was a lot of hype going into this race. The fact we would have the first ever recharge mid-race. And did we get a spectacle? Yes, we did. Obviously, it all kicked off when the first cars went in for their recharge. Did we have a few issues? Of course we did. Dan Tickton was one casualty of this in the fact that he had to go into the pit for a full reset of his car before he was allowed to even recharge. Now, this lends on to the other problem that I had with the pit boost. Now, Dan Tickton had to go into the pits to have his car reset before he could take his mandatory pit stop or his, pit recharge. Now, unfortunately, he pulled into the pit, had the hardware reset on the vehicle, but then wasn't allowed to stay in the pit to have his recharge there at that point. He had to go back onto the circuit, do more laps, then come back in for a recharge. Now, something similar happened with the Jaguar of Mitch Evans. Now, Mitch Evans picked up some front wing damage on the opening laps, which we saw. Now, it wasn't that bad. Certainly, as you compare that to the damage that was picked up by, say, Sam Bird on the second race. It was a front wing damage, nothing major, although Sam Bird did get a penalty for that, but we don't actually know if that was the reason for the penalty. But let's assume that it was. However, Jaguar had decided they were going to bring the vehicle into the pit stop. However, they were then told that actually you can't recharge the car and change the wing. Now, I understand from a safety concern that they don't want mechanics touching the vehicle whilst it's being recharged. I get that 100%, and that's a safety thing we have seen before. Think of the issue we had with Jake Dennis and the Andretti a few weeks ago. So I understand that. However, once the car had been recharged, what was stopping them from changing the front wing then and there? That way, someone like Mitch Evans wouldn't have also had to have done another few circuits before coming in for another stop, the same as Dan Tickton had. Now, I think this is possibly maybe the rules haven't been ironed out completely for how pit charge or pit reboost or however you want to phrase it now is being deployed. That's my concern, that there's too many open ends to how this thing can be looked at. Do I think there's an opportunity for growth in doing the pit boost? 100%. However, I think it should be a stop is mandatory. However, teams can elect how much time that they go for. I think this will be an interesting aspect because by the time you factor in between 30 to 35 seconds of pit lane entry, driving at pit speed, and pit lane exit, you factor that in with a recharge. Actually, what does that look like in terms of actually if you shorten the amount of time they're going to be there, then they come back on the track? Because let's be honest, once they all went for their pit boosts, the net change on the order didn't really change that much. It was really, again, it was the attack modes that did the main shuffling of the order. So I personally feel that you could actually say, okay, teams, you need to come in, but actually you can vary the amount of time that you want to charge for. They have to mandatorily have a stop, but actually if you want to come in for 5 or 10 seconds, then that's up to you, and see how that plays out. I think is an interesting development, and perhaps maybe there's further growth in this area, and I really think it's something we could see. From a spectacle point of view, it was fantastic to see the cars actually come into the pit, stop, and actually take on power. And let's not be honest, these cars are taking on a fantastic amount of power in one sitting. So, from a technological point of view, this really does have legs for the consumer sector, which is, let's be honest, what racing is all about. It's always been about developing for the future and the cars that you and I will buy in the years to come. So, I really think that was a fundamental leap forward and will help the industry going forward. Can it be tweaked for a racing setting? 100%, I think it can, and I think it literally is a tiny tweak of actually you can set how much time you want to sit in that box for taking on power. Do I think stipulating a time is a bad thing? Possibly. And I think maybe in a racing setting, by giving teams the freedom to adjust how much power they take on board, let's be honest, they used to do that in Formula One when they took on petrol. So doing that might actually negate what we saw when cars were coming back onto the track and realistically their net order only changing by 1 or 2 places, when realistically you look at what attack mode can now do and slingshot a driver a good 4 or 5 places up the field. It does go to show there could be some areas that could be tweaked there. So I think it's interesting. We've got a fantastic spectacle. It's brilliant to see. I think it just needs that tiny tweak to make it a little bit more competitive in a racing sense, but ultimately it was great and I can't wait for the next one.